Welcome aboard Pink Monorail. I'm your pilot, Michelle Valladolid, and next to me is my co-pilot, Noe Valladolid.
Hey everybody.
Last episode, we started to talk about the White City, the world's Columbian Exposition of 1894, the greatest World's Fair of all time, or at least till 1964. We had just started talking about the White City proper. In this episode, we'll talk more about the White City itself and some of the lasting influences of the fair. We're going to start with Japan. Japan had the only tidy room inside the Fine Arts Building, as I said last time, and they had an entire island to themselves in the White City called the Wooded Island. They had 2 Japanese buildings built there and a whole garden. The garden still exists today. Frank Lloyd Wright would go there and draw the buildings and the plants, and it was a huge influence on his work.
I can see that. There's a lot of the Zen and sort of the Shinto leanings in his architecture.
Absolutely. The buildings were left there because they were so beloved. They weren't torn down with the rest. But during World War II, some racist jerks committed arson and burned them to the ground. All the plants are still there, as well as a piece or two of stoneware, the little stone temples that are about a foot high. And you can walk on the Wooded Island today. The bridges from the fair are still there and beautiful. See some of these plants and flowers.
That's
from
lovely.
Japan. They brought over ones that they knew would survive the Chicago winters because they survived the Japanese winters. There was also a section of state pavilions as well as the international ones. Each state was trying to outdo each other. I mean, they built castles, they built mines, they built all sorts of things, except Vermont, who built a small cider mill. California had their own exhibit. The star of this was a knight sitting on a horse made entirely of prunes, and he was named Sir Prune.
Well, they must have thought we were crazy then, too.
They had a Liberty Bell made of oranges, and some other things made out of mostly dried fruits, all sorts of things. And they would get a fresh shipment every Wednesday.
From California.
Once a week. And so they'd take off all the prunes off of Sir Prune and hand them out to visitors and put new prunes on.
So this was happening before this show off of California being a green state year-round was done before the Pasadena Rose Float, which was another one of those events that was showing to the world that, hey, California has really nice weather year-round, and we have a big valley for growing all of these fresh fruits and vegetables.
Right. They were doing it from the time California became a state in 1850. Nearby was another building that had state exhibitions on the inside, and that was the agricultural building. California had a large presence there. They had wine. They had 94 wineries. They were not alone. Many other states had wineries. New Jersey had 4 wineries, and New Jersey is so well known for its fine wines.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't know how many gold medals they've gotten?
They had a fisheries building, which was the first large aquarium. Like, people had aquariums that sat on their desks.
Right.
That kind of aquarium that sat on a shelf. This was the first aquarium that you could walk into, and the glass was over your head. You could see a sea turtle swimming overhead.
Oh, wow.
It was just amazing. And you go into the living seas, or the seas with Nemo, rather, and you see that beautiful, huge aquarium tank all around you. And that's where it came from. It came from the White City.
Wow. Hey.
Different countries had pavilions as well. Japan had their island, but there were actually proper pavilions. I'm going to talk about Spain. Theirs was closest to the administration building as a place of honor because of Columbus's trip. Germany had an especially beautiful pavilion. Aside from the Krebs pavilion that had weapons, they had a pavilion that showed off artwork, and there was a huge style picture and also a sculpture, The Glory of Germania. Now, Germania is their Columbia.
Right.
The personification of Germany and a woman, yeah. So there was this beautiful statue. It was actually a fountain, Germania Fountain, and it had 4 goddesses holding the world, upon which stood Germania, this beautiful woman who held a spear or had a crown. One arm was up, her left arm, and in it was a lamp that was bigger than her head. And it was a very Art Nouveau looking lamp before Art Nouveau was really a thing.
No, this was about the era of Art Nouveau.
Because
Because
the 1920s.
but I thought you were talking about the White City.
Yeah,
The
Beaux Arts.
No, Art Nouveau was after the Belle Epoque, however
Right.
they pronounce it, but that
Right.
was in the late 1800s. That was about the time of the White City.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Okay, well, she was holding up this Art Nouveau
Uh-huh.
lamp over her head, and after the exposition was over, she went to live in Milwaukee with where her creator was from, and she was in a bank. During World War One, there was a lot of anti-German sentiment, so they changed the name of the bank to the Northern Bank. They moved the statue and hid it in a workshop
Uh-huh.
on its side. During World War II, they were talking about making her into scrap metal.
Oh no.
She weighed 6,000 pounds.
Uh-huh. That's a lot of bullets and a lot of tanks.
Yeah, the scrappers wanted to use the German statue against the Germans,
Uh-huh.
because that would be poetic justice. They offered $700, but the owners said that that wasn't enough, so the statue was saved. Or was it? That was the last we saw or heard of the statue.
There's no other record after.
One of the women who worked there said that she saw its arm in an elevated case going out, but other than that, there's no proof. There's no record of any purchase being made.
Uh-huh.
There's no record in any of the nearby smeltings of a statue going in and being melted.
Uh-huh.
Some people thought maybe the sculptor buried her in its family plot, but he died a pauper and had to sell the family plot just for money to live on in 1970.
So there's a good chance that it went to a private collector and the statue of Germania is somewhere.
In the last photograph of her, with the smelter standing next to her, the crown and the spear are missing.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't see the lamp either. So she may have been taken apart. She may still exist. It remains a mystery. Some of the state and international buildings were taken apart, disassembled, and reassembled elsewhere, places like New York and Ohio and Sweden. But the only remaining buildings, were the Japanese buildings. The Museum of Fine Arts, which is now the Museum of Science and Industry in Jackson Park, and an annex off property that was used for international meetings. And the interesting thing about those meetings is this is where the Pledge of Allegiance was first said. It did not have the phrase "under God" until the 1950s during the Red Scare.
Yeah, the McCarthyism.
McCarthyism. The U.S. was afterwards seen as a contender with the rest of the world in industry, in agriculture, in architecture, and more. It also brought us brownies, shredded wheat, crackerjack, juicy fruit, and double mint gum, Vienna beef, hot dogs, and the Chicago dog.
Hooray!
Yeah, I love the Chicago dog. You can have the sport peppers. I'll take the rest. The first carbonated diet drink came from the White City, but it didn't say what it was, so I have to wonder, was it like a sarsaparilla without sugar? I don't know. But root beer, not sarsaparilla, root beer came into prominence at the World's Fair. Here's another mystery for you. PBR.
Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Pabst Blue Ribbon. They said that they got their blue ribbon at the White City.
Uh-huh.
Now, I looked, and I could not find a single record of a beer competition anywhere during the exposition.
Uh-huh.
There may have been informal ones in the Midway Plaisance, but if there were, there's no record of them. The other thing is, when there were competitions held at the White City, the prize was not a blue ribbon, but a bronze medal with Columbus on it.
Oh.
So they should call it PBM, Pabst Bronze Medal.
Right. If they did indeed win any sort of prize at the White City.
Well, that would be PPR, Pabst Pretend Ribbon.
So, all you enjoyers of PBR, I just want you to know, you guys
You're
are
drinking a lie.
There it is. There it is. I didn't want to say it, but there it is.
There was another dishwasher, but this one was
mechanical
electric.
dishwasher.
An electric dishwasher. Aunt Jemima made her debut at the fair.
Mm-hmm.
Cream of wheat. Indoor electric lamps.
Oh, how fancy.
Yeah, they were gas in people's homes and in the cities even. But after the fair, a lot more people had indoor electric lamps because they saw them at the fair. Sewing machines made another try here, and very close to the last singer that came out.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the first singer that came out, but the last one shown at the fair. The Otis elevator that we talked about that took people onto the roof where they could see all the electric lights made its debut at the fair. And most elevators in the U.S. are Otis elevators. They're working to this day.
Well, you had mentioned that those elevators were also responsible in the the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
So this
I
was
don't know if they're still Otis elevators.
But so elevators were used both in Paris a few years prior as well as in the White City.
Yes, but this was the American debut of Otis elevators.
Huh.
We also had the typewriter, the Ferris wheel that we talked about earlier, the term Midway. The Art Institute of Chicago was that side building I was talking about. The Pledge of Allegiance. The first picture postcards came out of the fair that you put a stamp on in mail.
It was so popular.
It was so popular, and so were postcards, and they still are. The best book about Disneyland ever written was Disneyland The Nickel Tour, which is about postcards. They had the first commemorative stamp set. The next commemorative stamp set after that was accidentally misprinted upside down. It was the Wright brothers' first flight. That stamp is worth over $100,000 if you find one today.
Yeah, they're super rare.
Milton Hershey was at the fair. He had been in business for a while. He was a caramel maker. He had decided this year to add chocolate to his caramel business. Milton Hershey. From Hershey, Pennsylvania. And the secret to his chocolate, and it still is, the reason why it tasted so differently was that instead of fresh milk for his milk chocolate, he used sour milk to give it more depth of flavor.
Oh, wow.
Quaker Oats is still in business today.
Yeah.
I put them in my meatloaf.
So you talked about shredded wheat, and then cream of wheat, and Quaker Oats.
And Quaker Oats.
Man, people were really getting their breakfast work.
Well, peanut butter, which was known in some places in the South, made its national debut.
Oh, the greatest invention of all time.
I thought you would say that. In the Little House on the Prairie books, when Mary, the blind sister, goes to college, she comes back and she has a slate. It's a Braille slate, and it almost works like the Gutenberg. You pick out the little dots and it prints it on the paper.
Right.
Well, they had the first Braille machine. Think of going from hand lettering to a printing press.
Right.
This was like a Braille printing press.
Oh, wow.
They had the first moving walkway.
Right, and you said that it didn't really work most of the time.
It didn't really work most of the time. Halfway through the fair, they shut it down, and everyone just had to hoof it up here. But by 1900 in Paris, they got it working.
Very good.
They had the precursor to the zipper, the YKK zipper.
Right.
They had the precursor. They had third rail electricity for elevated cars.
The third rail. Keep your foot off the third rail.
Keep your foot off the third rail. They had phosphorescent lamps, which is the precursor to fluorescent lamps.
Those burn bright white.
This is where they had the first, and these are very popular with Disney fans, squashed pennies with an image on them.
Ah.
Kids for decades had been running out and putting pennies on the train tracks to flatten them, but this was a machine that flattened them and put an image into them. Embossed them with an image. The Clark cell was introduced as a measurement for voltage.
Oh, like
Duracell
the
batteries.
Clark cell.
The Clark cell. Pressurized aerosol spray made its debut, and we use olive oil spray. That's the pressurized aerosol spray.
When you were cooking butter spray and olive oil spray.
Yeah, and deodorants in the 70s. They had an electric automobile. This was the introduction in America to the Baha'i faith. Harry Houdini performed in the Midway Plaisance with his brother Theodore.
Oh, wow.
Magicians just starting out together.
Sort of like a young Penn and Teller. I wonder whatever happened to Houdini.
We'll never know. The White City influenced the City Beautiful movement, Olmstedian parks, Chicago, especially downtown Chicago, Columbia University, the University of Chicago, which was built not on the Midway Plaisance, but on the Midway Plaisance.
Just to the side?
Just to the side of it. Built on the Midway Plaisance. That's where the students gave it the name the Midway Nuisance.
Right.
The National Mall in Washington, D.C. was based on the Court of Honor.
Oh, I remember. It had that Arc de Triomphe and the 48 pillars for each of the states at the time.
No, the Court of Honor was the thing with the water and the statues. With the Grand Basin.
The horses with the tails of the fish.
Right, exactly. The National Mall with the Grand Basin was based on the Court of Honor with the Grand Basin.
Okay.
There are collectibles on eBay right now from the fair.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I have not been able to find that I want is the actual book of the fair. It's called The Book of the Fair.
The Book of the Fair.
The Book of the Fair. And it was the official guidebook. There are all sorts of guidebooks that said official guidebook 10 cents on it. They were not the official guidebook. Do you want me to pause this?
No, I don't. Because this was your Valentine's, but if you don't want it.
Oh my gosh. The Artistic Guide to Chicago and the World's Columbian Exposition.
Illustrated.
Oh, it smells so good. Look at this. It's a map of the fair.
Happy Valentine's Day, Shelly.
Thank you. Wow. I'm going to spend all night looking at this.
Okay, so what were you saying?
That, what was I saying?
That they're the official book.
The official book, which I'm still looking for.
You'll get it one of these days.
I'll get it one of these days. You'll find it for me. George Westinghouse got the contract for all of the exposition's electricity, which really angered Thomas Edison because he was there, and at every other major World's Fair afterwards.
Right.
It was looking through every single World's Fair. Famous visitors, Thomas Edison. Famous visitors, Thomas Edison. Kinescope, Thomas Edison. Polyscope, Thomas Edison.
Well, everywhere he went, he kept insisting that direct current was better, more reliable, and wasn't a threat to the people as alternating current was. And to prove it, he killed that poor elephant. So,
Topsy. Poor Topsy. We're going to talk about Topsy when we get to Coney Island.
Yeah, Edison can suck an egg for what he did.
Yeah, poor Topsy. On Prime Video, there's a documentary called Expo, Magic in the White City, and it's narrated by Gene Wilder. And the critics in the reviews were merciless. They said this thing was so boring. So I sat up and I prepared to be bored, and I was enchanted and mystified the entire time. I loved it. So if you have a certain brainwave, you're not going to be bored by it. And it's on Prime Video. Jules Verne wrote about the White City in The Will of the Eccentric. In the video game BioShock Infinite, the floating city of Columbia is created at the exposition and toured around the world to promote American exceptionalism. The White City also appears in the MCU show Loki on Disney+, and in the post-credits scene of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. The altar of St. John Conscious Church in Chicago and two side altars are from the fair. There's also an altar in a museum in Orlando, Florida. That is also from the fair, but it's been cut up some. The fair boasted the world's largest stove and world's biggest cedar bucket. The fair was set to close October 30th with a lavish closing ceremonies, but on October 28th, popular mayor Carter Harrison III was assassinated. Now, there was a fellow named Eugene Patrick Pendergrast, and he was the assassin. And what happened was Eugene worked on Carter Harrison's re-election campaign, and he got re-elected. Eugene felt that he was owed something for working on the campaign, and he heard that Carter Harrison was an old-style politician who would give favors and jobs to people who helped him. And this was very true about him. But Harrison had never heard of Prendergast.
Oh.
Prendergast just assumed because he'd volunteered that he was going to get a cushy job. As the fair ended, he realized he was not going to get a cushy job. He wanted to get a job running the fair. He showed up at Harrison's house. Harrison kept visiting hours back in the days before telephones and such, where the citizens could just come to his door and he'd answer the door and he'd talk to them.
Right.
So he was drinking a glass of wine at the piano, and this knock came at the door, and he went and he answered it. Prendergast said that he brought the gun because he wanted to scare him into giving him a job. But, like, the second he stepped in, he turned around and shot Harrison.
Right.
With the doors was still open and everything.
Nah, that's murderous intent as far as I can check.
Yeah, he was executed by hanging.
Well, that'll learn him.
Instead, the fair held a day of mourning. Thousands of people lined up at City Hall, where Harrison lay in state. That night at midnight, all of the lights in the White City were extinguished, except the Midway Plaisance, which stayed open one more day and night of heavy celebration and mourning. The fair was over. People argued over the buildings and keeping them standing, but the Fair Corporation had signed a contract saying that they would return Jackson Park to, well, a park. They burned down the Statue of the Republic in August. Striking Pullman workers, hello Roger, burnt many of the remaining buildings down during their strike. As during construction, they charged people 25 cents to watch, so too did tons of people come to see the smoldering ruins. It's not said whether or not they were charged money to see them. That comes later, Coney Island.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. The park was cleared in less than 2 years. Jackson Park is really beautiful to this day, with the now smaller Statue of the Republic and beautiful buildings from the exposition remaining. The wooded island still has Japanese plants growing, and beyond it, the Museum of Science and Industry shows off its back, which used to be its front, on the edge of the water. The president of the board of directors, Harlow S. Higginbotham, didn't want people to mourn the loss of the White City. He wrote, "Let us hope that future generations will look back to this place with reverence, satisfaction, and pride, as the spot where once was laid the deep foundation of a monument that should mark the new era. I have long sought for some consolation to justify the imminent destruction of our beautiful city, and I can find only this thought comforting. Whenever a people have gained distinction by the creation of some specially meritorious work, have declared it finished, and then rested to contemplate its grandeur and magnificence, they have fallen into a condition of decay. It is better, therefore, for us to efface our work, and cease to delude ourselves with the thought that there is nothing for us and those that come after us to do. Let us rather hope that what we have done will live as a stepping stone to grandeur and more heroic efforts, compensated with richer and rarer fruits. If it has merit and excellence, it will speak for and defend itself. Let us rather rejoice in the thought that what has been done is the culmination of a period in the progress of the world. These buildings will disappear and mingle with our dust, but their glory will ever live and continue to make an era in the progress of civilization long after their creators have been forgotten. The goal of our work as exhibit creators is experiential in nature, not rooted solely in physical forms. We seek to connect our audience with a lasting impression to make a positive, indelible memory with our guests." Note that they say guests just like at Disney. We imprint a moment in time which is not far off from what the great collaborators and investors in the World's Columbian Exposition sought after. Our goal is to carry the optimistic tone of progress forward to a better industry, to better craftsmanship, and, we'd like to believe, the betterment of society. He passed the torch, but in my opinion, no one was able to carry it until Walt Disney planned his little park.
It's arguable that that indeed is the fact. What they set, the bar that they set was exceptional. You know, Paris had an amazing expo, but the White City was on a completely other level, and their whole approach that it's better to erase it because that's how progress gets made. Like even Walt said, this is never going to be complete as long as there's imagination in the world. And the White City was very much, well, they can't keep building there, so they're gonna wipe the slate clean, honor it, it'll be in our hearts, and it'll just be one of those memories that this is where progress was made.
That wasn't the last White City, though.
Yeah, but it was the best.
It was the best.
There wasn't one better than that.
In England, they had several White City expositions where they had a White City, and they kept it up for 4 expositions. And that section of London is still called the White City. It didn't pales in comparison. There were also several amusement parks called the White City. The closest one was in Lincoln Park, right off of Lincoln Park in Chicago, and the Ferris wheel was moved there.
Oh, wow.
It was moved there until it was sold and taken to St. Louis. But it was called the White City Amusement Park, and they even had a little court of honor with the little statues and the little buildings. And the pool was actually, do you know what the Chutes ride is?
Is that the one where you're sitting on like a burlap sack going down a slide?
No, this isn't a little boat. Like, it was like the one they had in Knott's.
Okay.
Where you go almost straight down.
Right.
And then
you
across
skip
the
along
water.
the water.
Yeah. Well, the Great Grand Basin was where the boats went. There was a time in America when the majority of the amusement parks were either named White City, Electro Park, or Luna Park, which we'll learn later.
Yeah.
I want to close out the White City section of Manufacturing the Magic here on Pink Monorail with a speech from Daniel Burnham, the creator of the White City. Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble logical diagram, once recorded, will never die, but long after we are gone will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Remember that our sons and grandsons are going to do things that would stagger us. Let your watchword be order and your beacon beauty. He made this address to the construction workers who were starting construction, including one Elias Disney, whose son did go on to do things that would stagger us.
That's for sure. And continue it.
And that's the White City.
What a wonderful chapter. I really am looking forward to Luna Park.
Oh.
And Coney Island.
Yes.
And so many other stories that happened that...
But first we have to talk about trolley parks and pleasure parks.
Oh boy, is that going to be the next part?
That's going to be the next part.
All right.
No, actually.
Huh.
First we're going to talk about some more expositions.
Okay, so we're going to cover that on the next episode of the Pink Monorail. Shelley, if people want to find out more about theme park history, and Disney parks history in particular, where can they find your work?
They can find my work at micechat.com and jimhillmedia.com.
Excellent. And if you'd like to find out more about video games, I do a lot of writing on fighting games, but I also write sometimes about Disney and animation. You can find me on the Street Writer podcast. If you just Google it or Bing it, you should find my blog. And if you're on YouTube and you search for the Street Writer podcast, it should also point you at my videos. Well, that's it for me.
And me too. Right. I'm going to go read my book.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode. A special shout out to our sponsor, Circa 1955. Nicole is the founder of Luxillume, a small company that makes candles, wax melts, and room sprays. She creates scents that capture the season, nature, or wonderful memories. She also takes commissions for larger orders, such as weddings or company gifts. It turns out that Nicole is also a huge Disney fan and has a line called Circa 1955. She creates scents inspired by all things Disney. This includes the parks, attractions, treats, and films. She creates each formula and batch of candles herself. For every one scent she's released, she has probably made over 200 trials just to get the smell right. Don't take my word for it. Go to circa1955.com, order a candle, and use promo code PINK15. That's PINK15 to get 15% off your purchase. Support a small company that also gives back to the community. You're going to love it. Another shout out to Jim Hill for hosting Pink Monorail on his podcast network. The Jim Hill Podcast Network also includes Looking at Lucasfilm, The Disney Dish, I Want That, and Fine Tuning. Thanks for listening. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review for each podcast. Have a great day.